Hello and welcome to another episode of Ask Two Lawyers. And today we're going to talk even more about the Vanderpump Rules. Only this time we decided to invite somebody who knows a little something about the show, unlike Stewart and I. And so hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit more in depth in terms of the people involved here and kind of what this is all about. But we're also going to go over the legalities of it, because there was a special motion to strike the lawsuit that was filed. And we want to talk about what that is, what the result of it was, and kind of where we are now in terms of the legal process after that filing. So welcome, Christy. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
This is Christy Eisenbray, one of our paralegals. And Stewart, welcome to Ask Two Lawyers.
I'm excited to be here.
All right. So we realized, and we fully admitted last week, that we know absolutely nothing about Vanderpump Rules. Neither Stewart nor I watched the show. And so our job in all of this was to just talk about the legalities. So we were talking about Rachel Leviss. I don't even know if I'm saying the name's entirely correct. Rachel Leviss sued Ariana Madix and Thomas Sandoval. So who are these people, Christy? What are we talking about?
Well, they're all cast members on the show Vanderpump Rules. Ariana and Tom Sandoval were in a relationship for about 9 years and on the show, which was depicted on the show. And during the end of their relationship, Tom Sandoval and Rachel Leviss began having a secret affair with each other, which ended up being exposed. And and that's why we're here today talking about, and thus the lawsuit is a product of that.
And when we were talking about the
Christy, had you actually heard about the lawsuit, or when Keith asked you to come on and fill us in on this show, is that when you first learned of this?
No, I had heard about the lawsuit. I still follow the show, and I follow people on Instagram and gossip sites and things like that. So I was aware of the lawsuit. Yes.
Okay.
The lawsuit was kind of a big deal, right? Out in the news media for people who pay attention to it.
Definitely. I mean, it followed the whole scandal of it all. It's definitely a part of that.
And they called it that on the show, right? They called it Scandival, right?
Scandival, yes.
Interesting. Okay.
And last week when we were looking at the complaint, we noticed that the attorneys for Rachel Leviss, they kind of made allegations that insinuated that maybe Bravo or the production company let this scandal out in order to boost ratings. What are your thoughts on that? Or what's kind of the word on the street in terms of, was this something that was intentionally disclosed, or was it truly unfolded the way that Madix claims?
I mean, I think that by all accounts, most people think that it unfolded the way that Ariana Madix claims it did, with Tom's phone falling out of his pocket, I believe, and her picking it up and taking it to the bathroom and having some intuition that something was going on and deciding to look at his phone and finding what she did. Then, I believe that she contacted production shortly thereafter, and they picked up cameras to begin filming. This is their lives. And, we don't know exactly the reasons why she did that, but it would, I would think that, she wanted it to be part of the show and documented as part of the show,
Yeah. Yeah. And it certainly was spread far and wide, after that was released. So you also mentioned that you would listen to some of the podcasts. Rachel Leviss has a podcast.
Yes, she has a podcast called Rachel Goes Rogue, which she started after this all happened. And I think she, the name speaks to, her deciding to do her own thing and stand up for herself and, kind of go against Bravo. And she feels taken advantage of and led astray by Bravo and silenced by Bravo and the production companies and the cast members. And so this is her, that Rachel Goes Rogue is leaning into that. And the podcast episode I listened to was her interviewing her attorney, Mark Garagos.
Okay, well, that sounds interesting. What was the result of that interview?
Mainly, they were talking about, the case as much as they could. They also spoke about the fact that at one point, Tom Sandoval had hired Mark Garagos's brother, Matt Garagos, to represent him. He subsequently fired Matt Garagos after, I believe, Matt filed a lawsuit against Ariana, for invasion of privacy, almost like a cross complaint, I guess, against Ariana, invasion of privacy, among other things, for getting into his phone. And Tom came out with a statement saying, that wasn't his intention. The optics of it all, everybody hates him already. And now he's going after Ariana. And so, people were coming down on him left and right. And his statement says something to the effect that he was not aware. He understood it was just legal procedure. He wasn't aware of what was truly happening. And he has thus fired Matt Garagos.
Okay, interesting. Because I did notice in the court file the dismissal by Sandoval of his cross complaint. So I didn't understand the nature of that. So that makes a lot of sense now.
According to Sandoval's statement on Instagram or something, I think I came across it last week when I was looking at this. He basically says that he had no idea this was a lawsuit, meaning it was a cross complaint. He didn't understand it was a lawsuit, and that Matt Garagos had told him that it was just procedural. It's just something you just do, and it's not that big of a deal. So he said to go ahead and do it. And then when he realized, I'm actually suing Ariana. Whoa, okay, wait a minute. That's not what I'm sorry. Was it Ariana or I'm sorry, Rachel? Then he said, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sue. So that's where apparently that ended the relationship between Matt Garagos and Tom Sandoval, which again, you've got the Mark Garagos on the other side of this and their brothers. It's just kind of a crazy case thus far.
Right. And he was suing Ariana. He was cross complaining against Ariana.
It was Ariana. Okay.
For invasion of privacy. I'm trying to remember the other.
Was that for accessing his phone without his permission?
Yes.
I see. Okay.
Right.
And I remember,
assuming that's just to cover himself,
Yeah. And I remember seeing the complaint, but I just briefly looked at it and looked at it in depth. And so now that you're saying this, I'm wondering if it was a verified complaint. Probably not.
Doubt it.
Yeah. So an unverified complaint means that he wouldn't have to sign it, which means there is some credibility to the idea that maybe the lawyer filed it without, no good lawyer would file a lawsuit without explaining it to his client. But, it'd be different if he actually had to sign a verification and then he says, I didn't know it was a lawsuit. But probably the more realistic idea would be he didn't know it would blow up like that, and the lawyer was probably filing a cross complaint just in the course of what we do as lawyers. That wouldn't be that odd.
Exactly.
I mean, you're not if you're not a PR person, you wouldn't understand that. So,
did you want me to elaborate a little bit more about the podcast with Mark?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So the gist of it was that they got into Rachel's reasons for filing the lawsuit, because I know we're all sort of wondering, why isn't she suing Bravo, Evolution? I think there's another production company in there. I can't recall. But it sounds as if there is an NDA and an arbitration clause in there where she's, as you were speaking of on the last episode. And so she's going after Ariana and Tom because she can. And this is her way of standing up for herself. And on a larger scale, there's this whole reality reckoning out there that was started by, I don't know if you've heard of Bethany Frankel from Real Housewives of New York. She's a big business mogul now. She sold her brand Skinny Girl. Anyways, she's always kind of had beef with Bravo, and she's started gathering these, disgruntled reality stars who, have been, felt that they've been wronged by Bravo and or other networks, and, she had Rachel on her own podcast, and Rachel told her story on her podcast, and they're starting this sort of reality reckoning to establish laws that will protect these reality stars who sign up for these shows thinking, okay, I'm just out here sharing my life. And then, unbeknownst to them, production edits things, they can spin things, and they can create stories around these things that can end up, making you look really bad and, end up ruining your life even. So they're trying, I think, Mark was sort of talking about how he's a part of this because he wants to be part of establishing some laws that will protect these reality stars going forward.
Interesting. And so it does come down to the fact that by Levis suing Maddox and Sandoval in Superior Court and not suing the others, she could have a public disclosure of her lawsuit, which would not happen with an arbitration clause, especially with an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. All
Right.
that's going to be confidential. And so she wanted to get her story out in the public eye. The way you do that is you sue people that you don't have an arbitration clause with. And so that seems to be how this resulted.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So anything else on the that you can think of that was interesting on the podcast with Mark Geragos?
No, that was the gist of it. It was just, her asserting her right to stand up for herself and hopefully lead the way in setting an example for, further precedent that will be protecting reality stars going forward. And maybe get networks and, production companies to think twice before they do this. That they really used and abused Rachel in this instance for ratings. And that's what kind of the allegations are here.
Yeah. Okay. And that's what I was picking up on in the complaint is the, they're throwing a lot of allegations and blame towards Bravo, but they weren't a party. So I guess that's the backstory of that. That would make sense why they were doing that. So that brings us now to the special motion to strike that was filed. We call that an anti-SLAPP motion. And Stewart, maybe you can kind of walk us through just what is an anti-SLAPP and why was, just generally speaking, why would you file something like this?
Well, many people file it to harm another person. I'll give you an example. Donald Trump, being a builder before he was a politician and the president, if he was building a sky-rise building and you had, a little neighbor next door, little neighbor that made $40,000 a year, didn't have much money, and that neighbor filed a lawsuit to stop Donald Trump's project from going forward, then that neighbor that has limited resources. And so what Donald Trump used to do back in the day is they would just file lawsuits back at this person, even though they were not meritorious, they didn't have any facts to support them. And they would just do it to, basically bury the very poor neighbor in comparison to Donald Trump and his big project. And so some laws were put in place that I think had a very good idea. And that is, look, if you're going to file one of these suits, there is a motion that can be brought immediately, an anti-SLAPP motion. You don't have to go on with the lawsuit. You don't, because lawsuits can go for a long time. And the whole idea there is you don't want that little itty bitty neighbor having to bankrupt themselves because they brought a lawsuit against Donald Trump. And then he hits them back really hard with just a mountain of lawsuits. Well, that's not fair. So the safety valve is that a lawyer for the little neighbor can go in with a motion and say, these are not meritorious. We want them tossed out, and a judge can stop it. The problem is that anti-SLAPP statutes spread around the country, and I think they're in probably half of the states. As they've spread around, now they've been applied to other areas of the law, including probate law. And, how do anti-SLAPP statutes come into probate law? Well, they do, and they're there. But essentially what the anti-SLAPP statute in California says is you have a right to file this lawsuit if you can overcome two hurdles. If you can't overcome those two hurdles, then the anti-SLAPP is granted, the case is over, and significantly, attorney's fees of the person who filed the anti-SLAPP motion, the little neighbor, those have to be paid by the defendant because they want a little bit of teeth in the statute to make sure that we're protecting the little guy. These kind of laws are supposed to protect the little guy. The problem is now little guys are suing each other and using these anti-SLAPP mechanisms. And essentially what it is the first thing you have to show is that the activity that's being complained of is protected by a constitutional right of free speech. Did somebody have a right to say something, and just because you didn't like it, you file a lawsuit against them? Okay, we're not going to allow that type of behavior because you could really hurt somebody mercilessly who simply you have a disagreement with, or they said something that insulted you. And everybody's got a right to, exercise their right to free speech. That doesn't come up that often in our practice, but the second prong does. And that is, can the plaintiff, can the big developer like Donald Trump, can they establish that they have a reasonable probability of prevailing at the time of trial? That's the second prong. And think how difficult this is. No discovery has been taken. All we have is a lawsuit and usually another lawsuit in response to that lawsuit. No discovery, no depositions, no interrogatories, no documents being exchanged. And you're being put to the test. If you're that big developer, you're being put to the test saying you filed this lawsuit. You have to not only show that we're not infringing on someone's right to free speech, you also have to show that you have a reasonable probability of prevailing at the time of trial. Now, reasonable probability of prevailing, it's a very subjective term. And to one judge means one thing, and to another judge means another thing, and to another judge means another thing. It can be all over the place. And so this is, again, it goes back to judges kind of putting their finger in the air and saying, I have a bad feeling in my gut about this lawsuit. I think this bigger person is trying to hurt the smaller person and retaliate against them because a lawsuit was made. Therefore, I'm going to strike that complaint and get it out and give them their lawyer's fees. Or I believe that the person here suing does have a meritorious claim, and likely, they at least given time to do discovery, it's reasonable to conclude that they would have a chance to prove this at the time of trial. So that's essentially how an anti-SLAPP statute works. How did it actually work in this case, Keith?
Yeah, it's interesting because the first prong, like you said, is protected activity. So protected activity could be exercising your free speech, but it's also other things. So filing a lawsuit or a petition could be protective activity. Filing a complaint with the government agency could be protective activity. And where we see it mostly in our cases is where somebody files a lawsuit and somebody else files a counter suit of some sort, and then they get hit with an anti-SLAPP. So it almost has come to pass where whoever files the first lawsuit wins. So in this case, the court put out a substantial, so let me back up. So Maddox files an anti-SLAPP, and it's a special motion to try and strike the lawsuit filed by Rachel Leviss. And what Maddox is saying,
and I'm sorry, I'm just interrupting. The lawsuit filed by Rachel Leviss, that's the one for revenge porn and eavesdropping and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She files that against Sandoval and Maddox. And now you're saying in response, Sandoval or Ariana files some suit against Rachel. Is that right?
Yeah, she files the motion against Rachel. And she says, it's protected activity because I'm just exercising my right to free speech. And so I have the right to say whatever I want, and I can say whatever I want about Rachel Leviss and Tom Sandoval, and I can badmouth them all I want. And so in that sense, she's saying it's free speech. And then if she were to show that to the court, then it becomes Rachel Leviss's burden, as you said, to prove that she has at least minimal merit to be able to prevail at time of trial, which is not always an easy thing to do without discovery and depositions haven't been taken yet. So that's what's teed up before the court. Maddox wants the whole case thrown out because it violates her right to free speech. The court did a lengthy opinion. It was a 17-page opinion, which normally for trial court opinions, they're not usually that long. They're usually robust and they explain their holding, but they're not usually 17 pages. But I can imagine that this trial court knew that, number one, this would be public, and number two, it would probably be appealed no matter what decision they made. So they really focus in on protected activity. So is this lawsuit attacking Maddox's right to free speech? And so what it comes down to is the court says that the allegations made, so if the conduct that was alleged, if Maddox's conduct as alleged is illegal as a matter of law, and the term illegal for this purpose, just for purposes of this motion, means something criminal. And so if you can show that Maddox engaged in something criminal, then she doesn't have a right to free speech, because right to free speech is not unlimited. It has some parameters around it. So the age-old example in law school is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That would be illegal. It hurts public safety. People could be harmed. So there's times when the right to free speech has to yield to other laws. And that's true in criminal context. So the question becomes, was Maddox's conduct as alleged in the complaint criminal? And this isn't a criminal complaint, by the way, it's a civil complaint. But the question is, did she violate criminal codes as part of the allegations, penal codes as part of the allegations? And so that's the issue ultimately the court hones in on. So the first thing that is alleged to have been criminal is accessing the phone without consent. And so they say Maddox accessed Sandoval's phone without his consent. And so some of the facts that show that is she admits in her own declaration that she had the passcodes for the phone. She already knew the passcodes. And the thing the court finds most convincing is that apparently Maddox went to the restroom, locked herself in a stall, and looked at the phone in private. And so why would you look at a phone in private if you weren't illegally accessing it, or accessing it without consent? If you knew you're accessing it without consent, you would lock yourself away in a toilet stall, look at it. If you thought you had consent to look at it, why wouldn't you just look at it in front of Tom Sandoval? And so that was something that the court focused on to say, that looks like somebody who's accessing a phone without consent. And, Christy, maybe you can fill us in on what was the story of how she accessed this phone and all that.
Well, apparently, they were at, Tom Sandoval has a band, and they were at one of his shows. While he was on stage, the phone slipped out of his pocket. I'm not sure exactly how, but somehow he lost control of the phone, and someone gave it to Ariana, who now she's got possession of the phone. She's already had feelings that something was going on. She decides to take the phone into the bathroom, look at the phone, finds what she finds. I believe then she recorded from her own phone some of the video that she found on Tom's phone, went back out of the bathroom, confronted Tom, who then forcefully took back the phone and deleted the videos.
Yeah, so I think that was what the court was really focusing on here. Sorry, we have a little background noise at the moment. And so what else in terms of, and then what did Tom do once he found out that she accessed the phone?
From my understanding, he deleted the videos. He took the phone back and he deleted the videos.
Christy, was there also a point where the producers, got the cameras rolling again, and apparently they went over to Tom's apartment, and again, that's where Rachel confronted him again? Do you know anything about that?
I do. So they went over to Rachel's apartment. Tom was there during the filming of this, and at some point, apparently, allegedly, admitted that he did this without her consent. He initially tried to, go down the road that, no, you knew I was recording. But he eventually admitted that. By the end of the filming, I believe he realized he might be in some trouble for what he had just said. And he fought with the producers to not air that footage of the filming that day. Not all of, we saw some of the footage of it, but the part where he's admitting to filming her or filming her without her consent. And apparently the producers acquiesced and they took that out of there. And so that scene doesn't show him admitting to any of that. And it really just shows them as more of a united front, if anything.
Right. Yeah, and she's upset about that, and I'm sure her lawyers will be getting those raw, unedited tapes to discovery, assuming they exist. We have a comment from Galaxy S, and maybe you can give us some insight into this, Christy. She says, or Galaxy S says, Ariana sent Rachel a video from Ariana's phone, and Ariana certainly didn't steal the illegal video to help Rachel. Well, what's that? What's that about? Do you know anything about that?
I do. I believe when she found the video, I don't know if it was after she took it, took the video from her phone and took video of it from Tom's phone. But I believe she sent Rachel a text with the video and basically said, "You're dead to me." And that was, that was letting Rachel know, I know what's up.
Okay.
Right.
So we know that and this is something Keith and I had kind of discussed last week. And Keith, I want to continue to hear more about the anti-SLAPP and what your conclusion was there. But I mean, it seems to me that, well, why don't we just continue on with that? Because we're going to go down the wrong road here.
Well, okay. So let's remember that point, Stewart.
Okay.
So I'm just going to say that under Penal Code Section 502, it's actually illegal to access somebody's phone or computer system without their consent. And so it applies to use any data, computer system, computer network. And so the allegation is that's exactly what Maddox did and Ariana did, and therefore that would be illegal conduct for purposes of this anti-SLAPP. So that was very interesting. And then also making a copy of the FaceTime video. So Maddox, everybody knows, and she admitted in declarations that she made a copy of the FaceTime video, and that was what apparently Sandoval was trying to delete from her phone, or in some regard. But just by the virtue of the fact that she accessed the phone, she made a copy of the FaceTime video, and then she ran away. Maddox declares Sandoval grabbed Maddox's phone and ran away in an effort to delete the recording, which he would not have done had he given permission for her to access the phone in the first place. And so for all of those reasons, the court decided that this was not, it was not protected activity because there's an exception. There's an exception to free speech because this was criminal conduct. And therefore, they denied the special notice. They denied the anti-SLAPP. The lawsuit was not dismissed, and it would continue on from there. The interesting part is Rachel Leviss didn't even have to get to prong 2. So there was no requirement that she even show minimal merit because the court dismissed it on prong 1. This is not protected conduct. I thought that was interesting because that doesn't happen that often. It's pretty rare that you win on prong 1. And then the other thing I'll note is everybody filed appeals. And so as soon as the decision came out, Ariana Maddox filed an appeal, Rachel Leviss filed a cross appeal. I'm not sure what the grounds for those appeals are yet because you first file a notice of appeal and then the briefs come later. So we don't have any appellate briefs yet to look at to see what the arguments are. But that probably explains why we have a 17-page decision from a trial court, because they knew that people were going to appeal, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened.
Right. And we all know how long appeals take in the state of California. So I'm wondering, if they're supposed to go to trial in November, do we think that the trial will be, moved out?
Yeah, it would almost have to be. And yeah, I mean, appeals can easily, in my experience, can take 2 to 3 years to go from start to finish on an appeal. What's your view of that, Christy? You used to work for the appellate court.
Right. That's exactly the case. It could take a year or more for an appeal to see its way through the process. There's briefing, there's oral argument, there's a decision that has to be, prepared and, given by the court. That could easily take a year or more. So I don't see how they could go to trial in November when these issues are still up in the air in the appellate court.
Yeah. So that was the disposition. Prong 1, Rachel Leviss wins round 1 in terms of the motion to strike. So what are your thoughts on that, Stewart?
What I'd like to see is the Court of Appeal make a decision and then rush it right up onto the California Supreme Court and have them find anything regarding this case and then add, and anti-SLAPPs don't apply to probate law. Yeah. That's what I'd like to see happen if you're asking me. So, but yeah, no, the appeals process, Keith, we've done appeals. Christy used to work at the appellate court. It's mind-numbingly long. And a year and a half is not a surprising amount of time to wait on appeal. And think about it. You've already gone to trial in most cases. That's 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years to get to trial. Here it's an anti-SLAPP issue. So it's that's why it's so soon at the beginning of the trial. So that one probably gets heard, in the next year, but still think about a year from now that finally gets heard. And now you got to come back right to where you were before that was filed. Oh my gosh, that is just painful.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. So do you remember your thoughts, Stewart, that you were going to go down before?
Yeah, I do. I kind of struggled with the revenge porn versus the intentional infliction of emotional distress claims that are being brought by Rachel Leviss. It seems to me that when Ariana apparently texted back to her a video of her doing some things, I guess, that are there's some nudity involved and kind of pornographic in nature. That certainly would go to intentional infliction of emotional distress, because, clearly you're letting somebody else know, I have viewed this. And of course, she viewed it in a way that she did not have the right to. And now she's hitting Rachel Leviss with it because she's angry. She's seeing that, hey, Tom Sandoval, her man, is with Rachel, or, at least, they're exchanging photos she doesn't like. And you can see why she'd be pissed off about that and angry about that. But she really wanted to zing her. And so she sends her a text message with the video, meaning that Ariana has looked at that video and likely looked at it several times before she sent it on to Rachel. That's very violative. It's very awful to think about you receiving that text, and then the power that Ariana has in her hands of sending that video out to other people. It would just be excruciating. You could see why Rachel Leviss was so disturbed by this. So what I was getting at was, I think this certainly squares with the intentional infliction of emotional distress claim. The revenge porn, is it enough that the transfer was back to the victim? Is it enough that the transfer of the video back? And I just don't do, I don't do this area of the law, but I know you gotta spread this stuff out there somehow, some way. And I wonder, just the fact that you knew it would traumatize the person who it was sent to, even though they're in the video, that's a transfer of private materials to someone else, even though it's the person in the video. And I just don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, it would be interesting. And then, of course, it begs the question, was it showed to other people? And, you're going to love this comment. So we have another comment by Galaxy S again. The first part of this goes to preservation of evidence. That's right up our alley. And then how would people know what was on the tape unless, she showed it around that? And I've heard that before too. And Christy, maybe you can speak to that there's people who seem to know the contents with some familiarity of what was on the recording. How would they know that if they didn't see the recording?
Well, these are Ariana's friends. I imagine she's talked to them about it, just like any of us would probably talk to our girlfriends about this if it happened. I would probably be talking about it too. It doesn't mean I necessarily showed anything to anybody, but I might talk to my friends about it. And accordingly, her friends are talking about it. This is a television show, and all their podcasts are them talking about the show and what's happening. So that makes sense to me. Does that qualify as, spreading this around to others? What are we talking about here? Are we talking about sending the video out, or just talking to your friends about something that happened to you?
Yeah. And I want to go back to preservation, but another comment, which I think is a good point, is Ariana would not have that power if Sandoval hadn't recorded Leviss without her knowledge. That's true. If there was not this illegal recording allegedly by Rachel or by Sandoval of Rachel, Ariana would not have been able to describe what she can't see, and if there was no recording. But
and the question is also, what is Tom's responsibility in this?
Yeah.
And so eavesdropping, that's the one claim that's being made against him, because he's taking photos of her without her permission and consent. But I also question the phone drop incident. How does a phone drop out of your pants and slide across the floor right to the person who can take it and use it and do something bad with it? And of course, we did see Ariana apparently, what I've been told, did run to the bathroom and hide and look at the phone. But how did it come out from his pants? If it truly was just one of those things that happened, which I'm having a hard time imagining, but I suppose it could, maybe he's not at fault for that. But he is at fault for if Rachel's being honest and saying, I didn't give consent, and most people don't give consent for those types of photos, then I think that's his responsibility, and he can be held accountable for that.
Yeah, the recording itself is a problem. Let's go back to preservation of. Go ahead, Chrissy.
I was just going to chime in on that, on how Ariana got a hold of the phone. And my understanding is that Tom was on stage, moving around quite a bit on stage. Dropped the phone fell somehow. Someone else obtained the phone and then gave it to Ariana, which makes sense. That's his girlfriend. So
I see. So the moral of the story is don't rock out so much. Don't record people to begin with. But anyway, there's a lot of morals here. I don't know. We need to go down that road.
This is not the right show for morals.
No, not a lot of moral lessons here.
If you only knew, I could give you quite a bit of background of this show. This is I won't say this isn't the worst of it, but there's quite a few other stories I could tell you about this show. So yeah, definitely
I can imagine.
The highest
Let's go back.
ethics and morals level.
I want to go back to preservation of evidence. So the question was, will Tom and Ariana, will they have to preserve their phones? What's the issue there, Stewart?
Well, the truth of the matter is we were all under an obligation in the state of California that if you are sued in a case, you have a duty already to preserve any and all evidence that may apply to that case. And if you destroy that evidence, and there are ways to find out if you destroyed it, you're not as sneaky as you think you are, then you can have sanctions put against you. Sometimes not just monetary sanctions, but evidentiary sanctions. In other words, maybe if you're a defendant and you deleted all the text messages that showed that you were guilty, let's say here Ariana texts everybody, 10 people the picture, and then she does a good job of calling everybody and getting them to clean up when she realizes she's gone too far, and asks everybody to delete everything, and then she deletes it herself. There could be evidentiary sanctions to the extent that a court could strike her answer, strike her ability to even respond to the lawsuit that's been filed by Rachel Leviss, and there simply would be a finding of damages against her. So that's something that could, and I'm not saying that happened in this case, but that's essentially the issue with preservation of evidence. So what we lawyers do, though, is we like to put the other lawyers and sometimes if somebody's not represented, individuals on notice that you're not to be deleting this stuff. And so we send out preservation letters. Some people think, I can destroy stuff up to the preservation letter getting there. No, do not destroy evidence. Or you're going to have to answer for it in front of a judge. And if a judge thinks that you were being malicious, trying to hide something from the other side, it can be punitive the way the court can punish you for that type of behavior.
Yeah, it's the old saying that the cover-up's worse than the crime, right? So preservation of evidence is a big, big deal. And when parties are found to have destroyed evidence, courts do not look kindly on that at all. And there's some severe sanctions for that. But we do have a preservation of evidence letter that we send out. We make sure that everybody's on notice of that, even though they're already under a duty to do it. And obviously, we take it very seriously with our own clients and make sure that they understand that as well. So I guess to your point, Christy, Tanaka says there's no professional code of conduct. Yeah, that's probably a true statement. So we're getting some really nice comments today. I appreciate everybody participating. So yeah, I mean, this goes back to, possession is the crime. And I think that's the whole problem for Tom Sandoval in this case is he illegally recorded something and then he possessed it. And ultimately that's going to be, kind of what he's going to be held liable for. And we'll have to see kind of where that goes and if that ultimately goes to a jury or if they settle it before trial. It seems like obviously right now with everything, everybody's very entrenched. This case is going up on appeal. It's hard to imagine a case like this ever settling prior to going to trial, but you never know.
Christy, have you ever, it sounds like you watch some of these reality TV shows, or at least you watch this one. Have you ever seen one where people actually come out of it good? And it seems like these all of these just go down the drain at some point, don't they?
Yes and no. Some people really, use the shows for good and they use them to build their businesses and make a name for themselves and end up rising to fame because of it. Even Ariana, she's gone on from this whole scandal. She ended up on Dancing with the Stars. She's starring on Broadway. She's received numerous sponsorships. Things aren't too bad. Other than this lawsuit, which is pretty terrible, but other than that, I think she's sort of ended up benefiting quite a bit from it. And in addition to the other cast members as well. The other cast members have even made merch and things based off of this whole scandal thing. And they've made money off of this as well. So not only on this show, but yes, I've seen on other shows, people have done very well, parlaying their fame, in good ways, but, bad behavior always shows itself, especially if you're on a reality show.
Yeah,
sure. Well, and that's what sells too. People sitting around and playing kumbaya with one another, that, nobody wants to watch that. They want to watch something edgy. So
I would not be good on a reality show. That'd be canceled real quick.
There's a question. Is there a heat? This is by Natasha Trash. is there a heat of the moment allowance, or I think what Natasha's saying, exception to Ariana's part? In other words, she was so shocked when she saw this video that she just acted, she didn't have her sanity about her and just, sent it out to various people. Keith, is there a heat of the moment allowance for somebody in this type of case?
I mean, there's a couple of ways that could play out. So first of all, your point earlier, Stewart, that if all Ariana did was send this to Rachel, is that really illegal? You're just sending it back to the person who it is. I'm not sure, if that's really going to win the day. But if she has showed it to other people, that'd be different. In terms of, there's no legal exception for heat of the moment, but it's certainly something a jury could consider. And that's why we have juries. And so one of the pitches that the defense could do is say, look, this was somebody who was acting out of emotion and passion and was very upset, and she did this thing, but it wasn't a knowing breach. She didn't knowingly try to disseminate this. She was just very upset. And a jury that's listening to this case could let Maddox off the hook on that basis and say, well, that makes sense. We're not going to hold her liable because she was an emotional and all that. That's one of the benefits of the jury system, I think, is that it kind of safeguards issues like that. And ultimately, if this goes to trial, a jury will have to decide, was this truly an intentional act? Was this something that happened in the heat of passion, and so we're not going to hold her liable? Or are we going to hold her liable, but not for a huge amount because it was in the heat of passion? So maybe she has to pay something, but not something big. There's any number of ways that could play out. So that's what comes to my mind, Stuart. What do you think?
I think that it's a fairness issue. I think that juries and judges tend to hear a story, and even though judges become kind of immune to the emotional side of stories as the years go by, as they're on the bench, they're still people too, and they understand that there are moments that we act out in a way that we wish we hadn't, based upon the stimuli or environment around us that kind of triggered us. And I would say that if, I don't know anything about these people, but if Ariana truly was in a relationship with Tom Sandoval for 9 years, it sounds like, and they were, intimate and close and, shared secrets and loved each other. If you came across a video or a photo even of things that just looked wrong to you and really hurt your feelings, you might say, sorry, I've got somebody here keeping other dogs away from me today. I'm going to have to pass it back to you, Keith.
No, that's okay. I
just wanted to add a little bit to that. I think the key here is going to be whether or not it's determined that Ariana only sent that video to Rachel and had it herself, or did she share it with many others? And, that's yet to be seen. We have to find that out. I don't know if they're going to be checking the phones. And I know that's her story as of right now, is that she did not share it with anyone else. And so I could see that being a key factor, especially with a jury. She took that video and she sent it to Rachel and Rachel only, and she didn't share it with anyone else. And it can't be proven that she shared it with anyone else. Well, then that's a big difference than if she turned around and she sent that to 10 other people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge difference, because that is the difference between acting out in emotion and in a moment versus being intentional and trying to disseminate it to destroy somebody. Two very different factors.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. Well, that's what we have on Vanderpump Rules. It's going to be very interesting. We'll certainly be monitoring this case as it goes through appeal. It does take a number of months for the appellate briefs to finally be filed. It could be 6 months. It could be 10 months. But we'll come back and give regular updates as we get more information. It'll also be interesting, Christy, to your point, to see whether or not, I don't think the trial is going to go forward in November, but it's with the appeals pending. But we'll have to see kind of what happens there as well. There's a lot of issues, a lot of sticky issues in this case, so it'll be interesting to watch it go through the process.
Definitely.
Do you have any other thoughts, Stuart?
No, I'm looking forward to watching how the case progresses. And as we go along, Christy, I'll probably be bending your ear a little bit to figure out who these people are and how they relate to one another in the show.
Definitely. I'm happy to oblige. I'll stay on top of it.
And I'm super happy to have you join us today. Thanks for being willing to do that.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining, and we will see you next week for another episode of Ask Two Lawyers.